Look at the screen. Endless, empty compounds, miles of razor wire leaning inward. Not in a war zone, but on American soil. Now look at this footage. 1987, the Iran-Contra hearings. A United States congressman leans into his microphone and asks Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North about a secret plan to suspend the Constitution. The room freezes. A lawyer violently interrupts. The microphone goes dead. This isn't a glitch. It is the exact moment the government accidentally admitted the unthinkable is real. The legal framework to detain 400,000 citizens without a trial is not an internet rumor. It is a fully vetted blueprint sitting in a classified vault in Washington, right now. We are living on borrowed time. If a critical cyber attack crashes the grid tomorrow, or a domestic crisis hits the boiling point, your civil rights can vanish in exactly 3 seconds. You are not standing on solid ground. You are standing on a legal trapdoor, waiting for the lever to be pulled. We are going to drag you through the physical and legal architecture of Readiness Exercise 1984. We are pulling the blueprints out of the shadows. You will see the exact mechanisms of survival and suppression, the logistical choke points, the shadow executive orders waiting for a signature, the silent rail routes designed to move human cargo. We will show you exactly how a functioning democracy can be flipped into a locked-down military state overnight. There is no escape clause. We drop into the dead air of a Senate hearing room. 1987. To the investigative archivist poring over the declassified tapes, the physical tension in the room is palpable. The camera pushes in violently on a nervous official. The air conditioning hums, but the sweat is real. The archivist watches the footage frame by frame. They see the exact millisecond the panic sets in. A congressman has just asked the one question that was strictly forbidden by the committee. What triggered this on-camera meltdown? The archivist cross-references the transcript with heavily redacted FOIA requests. Beneath layers of black ink, the paper trail points to a highly classified drill executed by the Reagan administration in 1984. It was known as Readiness Exercise 1984, or simply Rex 84. This was not a standard paper exercise. It was a full-scale stress test of the American Republic's absolute breaking point. The documents reveal a frontline mentality, treating the American homeland as a volatile theater of war. The archivist traces the origin of the directive, noting the unprecedented level of secrecy. Cabinet members were kept in the dark. The chain of command was bypassed. This exercise was designed to evade the standard checks and balances that hold a society together. The state was rehearsing its own survival, and in that survival, the citizen becomes the primary threat. Following the bureaucratic blood trail, the archivist isolates the architect. The drill was drafted in large part by a young, zealous military officer operating deep within the National Security Council, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Through the archivist's eyes, North's memos read less like policy and more like a tactical strike on domestic soil. He wasn't just planning for a foreign invasion. He was engineering a total system override from the basement of the White House. The core scenario of Rex 84 is a masterclass in controlled demolition. The archivist uncovers the primary objective: test the federal government's absolute ability to declare martial law across all 50 states. The plan outlines the immediate unilateral suspension of the United States Constitution. It is a legal decapitation strike. Military commanders are pre-authorized to completely take over state and local governments, stripping governors and mayors of all authority. The shockwave hits immediately. The front line is suddenly your front yard. The archivist notes the chilling efficiency of the protocol. There is no debate, no judicial review, no congressional vote. Just a seamless transition from civilian law to military dictate. The military police become the supreme law of the land. It is a bloodless coup, written into the emergency powers of the executive branch, perfectly legal and entirely lethal to freedom. The Republic falls, and the paperwork is already filed. But a military takeover generates massive resistance. How do you pacify a heavily armed populace? The archivist pulls a supplementary annex, and the true scale of the horror comes into focus. The drill specifically mapped out the brutal logistics for the mass overnight detention of over 400,000 people. The targets were undocumented immigrants and any American citizens deemed national security threats. The definition of a threat, of course, was left deliberately vague. 400,000 human beings. The archivist calculates the sheer industrial weight required for this operation. You need trains, food logistics, barbed wire, and armed guards. This is a massive supply chain of captivity. Rex 84 proved that the United States government possessed both the hardware and the cold calculus to process its own population like cattle. The logistical pipelines were mapped out to the mile, ready to absorb a massive influx of domestic prisoners. We return to the 1987 Senate hearing. The sweat on the official's face now makes perfect sense to the archivist. The man on the stand knows exactly what is buried in the archives. He knows about the lists, the camps, and the suspended rights. And he knows that the congressman with the live microphone has just stumbled onto the most radioactive secret of the Cold War. A secret that was never meant to be debated in the light of day. The archivist stares at the frozen frame of the video. The sudden interruption by the lawyer isn't just legal defense, it's a panic reflex. The federal government had essentially war-gamed the destruction of its own founding document, and the blueprints were sitting in briefcases just off camera. If the public realizes that martial law is not a foreign concept but a domesticated weapon, the social contract shatters completely. The illusion of permanent freedom is bleeding out on the Senate floor. The panic in the room is not about national security. It is about exposure. The entire shadow architecture of the state is hanging by a thread. The archivist watches the lawyer lean in, desperately whispering into his client's ear. The committee chairman aggressively gavels the room into submission. The system is violently defending its right to crush the citizen. The truth is trapped in the room, right on the edge of the live microphone. A United States congressman is silenced on national television by his own committee. The feed is cut. The question is buried. But the documents survived. What exactly was he about to reveal to the public? We are going to rip open the files they tried to burn, because the infrastructure they built in 1984 didn't disappear. It evolved, and it is waiting for you. The unredacted memo from Oliver North sits heavy on the desk, the exact document they tried to bury on national television. I am staring at the actual mechanics of a silent coup, highlighted in aggressive red ink right across the text of the Bill of Rights. This is not a battlefield in a distant country. This is the front line of your own civil liberties, and the casualty report is already written. The ticking clock of martial law does not start with a gunshot. It starts with a pen. Under the harsh glare of the desk lamp, the red marker slashes through the Fourth Amendment. The ink bleeds through the heavy paper, crossing out your protection against unreasonable search and seizure. The panic in that 1987 Senate hearing was never about a rogue operation. It was about the terrifying speed of execution. If a catastrophic cyber attack hits the grid tonight, the legal switch flipping you from citizen to suspect takes less than 3 minutes. We are conditioned to look for the wrong warning signs. You think the end of a republic requires a violent military uprising, columns of tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, or a charismatic dictator storming the Capitol. But that is pure Hollywood fiction. You do not need a violent military coup to end a functioning democracy. You just need the right piece of paper, sitting in a secure briefcase, signed by an executive leader in a moment of absolute, blinding panic. The foundation of this immediate strike capability rests on presidential emergency action documents. In the intelligence community, they call them PEADs. These are highly classified draft executive orders, pre-written and legally vetted, designed to bypass Congress entirely during a national crisis. They are sitting in a secure vault right now, fully weaponized. There is no debate, no voting process, and no judicial review. The trigger is already cocked and waiting for a target. I read through the declassified summaries, and the sheer scale of raw power is suffocating. These documents are not contingency plans for rescuing civilians. They are offensive protocols for domestic domination. When the alarm sounds and the nation is paralyzed by fear, these drafts become the supreme law of the land instantly. The survival of your constitutional rights depends entirely on an executive branch that has already drafted the exact paperwork required to erase them. The legal architecture enabling this shadow government was hardened by the National Emergencies Act of 1976. On paper, it sounds like a necessary administrative tool to manage disaster relief. In reality, it is a dormant dictatorship. The moment the president steps to the podium and officially declares a state of emergency, a massive arsenal of sweeping statutory powers is instantly unlocked. The normal rules of engagement for civilian life are permanently suspended. Under this 1976 framework, the executive branch gains immediate authority to seize private property without a warrant. They can take absolute control of domestic transportation, grounding every commercial flight and halting every freight train in the country. Your ability to move, to communicate, or to access your own bank accounts is instantly subject to federal lockdown. The state of emergency is the ultimate weapon of mass suppression, deployed without a single bomb. This is exactly how Readiness Exercise 1984 was engineered to operate. The Rex 84 drill relied heavily on these continuity of government frameworks, essentially using the threat of a crisis to rewrite the social contract overnight. The war game authorized the immediate deputization of active-duty military personnel to act as domestic law enforcement. The soldiers trained to fight foreign wars are suddenly patrolling your neighborhood with live ammunition. This federal mobilization of troops on domestic soil fundamentally violates the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. That historic law was specifically designed to prevent the military from policing American citizens. But the architects of continuity of government found the legal loophole. By utilizing the panic of a severe crisis, they bypassed the century-old barrier separating the soldier from the police officer. The front line is suddenly drawn right through your front yard. The most terrifying aspect of this shadow bureaucracy is the absolute darkness in which it operates. These martial law protocols are not subject to public debate, nor do they face congressional oversight until long after they are activated. By the time a judge or a senator even sees the text of the emergency order, the troops are already on the streets, and the curfews are enforced. The legal trap is perfectly set and armed before anyone outside the executive branch even knows it exists. You are living in a society where the kill switch for freedom is constantly maintained and updated. I am looking at the timeline of execution, and it is a pure, breathless freefall. 0 hour hits. The emergency declaration is signed. The presidential emergency action documents are broadcast to military commanders across the continent. Within hours, the legal definition of an American citizen is downgraded to a potential insurgent. You are caught in a crossfire you cannot even see. The red marker continues to slash through the documents on the desk. Freedom of speech, gone. The right to a speedy trial, gone. Protection from cruel and unusual punishment, suspended indefinitely. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It is a cold, legally sound reality waiting for the right spark. The architecture of a police state is fully integrated into the existing legal code. We are blindly trusting a system that has already rehearsed the precise mechanics of our own subjugation. The ink is dry on the emergency orders, and the legal trap is completely operational. But the law is merely a set of instructions written on paper. To actually execute a domestic lockdown of this magnitude, you face a terrifying logistical reality. Where do you physically put hundreds of thousands of detained citizens overnight without sparking a full-scale civil war? The answer to that question is not found in a courtroom. It is built out of concrete, steel, and miles of razor wire. The ink on those emergency orders is dry, but an executive signature cannot physically detain anyone. I am walking the perimeter of a deactivated military installation at dusk. The wind is howling through endless rows of empty barracks. The abstract legal framework of martial law dies the moment you need to put a human being in a cage. You are looking at the terrifying physical reality of continuity of government. This is where the paper trail ends and the steel begins. Through the lens of a logistics contractor, this silent facility is a ticking time bomb. The law is just words on paper, easily signed in the dead of night. But where do you physically put 500,000 screaming, panicked people overnight without starting a full-scale civil war? You cannot simply commandeer sports stadiums. You need dedicated, hardened infrastructure capable of absorbing a massive influx of bodies instantly. To solve this colossal housing problem, the architects of Readiness Exercise 1984 had to repurpose an existing federal asset. They utilized the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, but they did not use it to hand out blankets or bottled water. They executed a hard pivot, transforming the agency's primary mission from civilian disaster relief to aggressive civil defense and mass domestic detention. The contractor pacing this fence line sees the hidden genius in that pivot. FEMA already possesses the supply chains, the transport contracts, and the emergency budget to move mountains of material. By hijacking this disaster response network, the shadow government masked a police state apparatus as a humanitarian effort. When the trucks roll into your neighborhood, they will wear the logo of rescue, but they are rigged for capture. You cannot hide a prison camp for hundreds of thousands of citizens in plain sight. The blueprints for Rex 84 solved this by cannibalizing the military's own massive footprint. The plan formally designated over 20 major military installations as primary holding centers. They activated remote, heavily fortified locations, including Fort Chaffee in Arkansas and Eglin Air Force Base down in Florida. Operating in these zones, you quickly realize the sheer geographical scale of the operation. Eglin Air Force Base alone covers nearly 500,000 acres. That is enough physical territory to swallow the entire city of Los Angeles. When you isolate detainees on an active federal military reservation, you immediately strip them of access to local courts, state police, and the prying eyes of independent journalists. The raw mathematics of human captivity are staggering. The contractor's documents are not filled with political ideology. They're cold spreadsheets. Logistical planners had to calculate the exact daily caloric requirements, the crushing sanitation loads, and the emergency medical triage needed to keep massive civilian populations alive behind razor wire. We are talking about millions of gallons of potable water and thousands of tons of waste. If the supply chain fails for even 48 hours, a detention camp turns into a mass casualty event. I've seen the disaster models. A sudden outbreak of a pathogen in a hyperdense holding sector will burn through the population like wildfire. To prevent an absolute bloodbath, the state must engineer a flawless system of biological control. Every meal, every drop of water, and every breath is strictly rationed and monitored. Look closely at the perimeter of this deactivated compound through the handheld camera. Notice the guard towers. They are positioned facing inward, not outward. They are not scanning the horizon for a foreign invader. They are watching the courtyard. Declassified engineering reports show that converting these bases required a highly specific architectural modification. This is the detail that makes your blood run completely cold. The federal contractors were explicitly ordered to reinforce the heavy perimeter fences and angle the razor wire inward. This is a structural design specifically engineered to prevent mass breakouts. When you see an inward-leaning fence, you are not looking at a military staging ground or a refugee shelter. You are staring at the blueprint of a federal penitentiary built to hold an entirely domestic population against its will. The logistics contractor standing in the freezing wind knows exactly what it takes to build this. It requires thousands of tons of rolled steel, poured concrete, and a completely silent workforce. The infrastructure is sitting here, quietly rusting in the twilight, waiting for a single broadcast from Washington. It is a dormant machine, fully capable of processing you, your neighbors, and your entire community in a matter of hours. The true horror is not that these facilities exist. The terror is that they are entirely empty. A prison with no inmates is a vacuum demanding to be filled. The moment the national grid goes dark, or a critical cyber attack paralyzes the banking sector, the activation codes will transmit. The heavy transport engines will start. These desolate barracks will suddenly flood with the blinding light of military-grade arc lamps. The physical cages are already built, rigorously tested, and perfectly maintained. The logistics are flawless. But a cage is useless if you do not know who to put inside it. If martial law drops at midnight, the state cannot afford to guess who the dissidents are. They need a perfectly curated, instantly accessible roster of targets. They need a machine that has been silently watching your every move for the last 20 years. The physical cages are already built, rigorously tested, and perfectly maintained. But a reinforced perimeter is useless without a manifest. The logistical nightmare of where to put a captive population instantly gives way to a far more surgical problem. Who exactly gets put there? We must follow the trail from the rusting chain-link fences to the true heart of the operation. The threat is immediate, and the math is unforgiving. If a federal state of emergency drops at midnight, how does a tactical strike team know exactly whose door to kick down by 1 a.m? You cannot arrest hundreds of thousands of people using guesswork. You need a weaponized, instantly accessible roster of targets, ready to be executed at a moment's notice. Step inside the deafening roar of a modern data center. Cold air blasts through the server aisles. The investigative archivist stands in the dark, watching a rapidly scrolling, infinite list of names, IP addresses, and social connections reflecting in the camera lens. This flashing digital matrix is the brain of the shadow state. It is alive, and it is endlessly hungry. The architecture of this targeting system was born in the exact same era as the detention camps. During the Cold War paranoia of Readiness Exercise 1984, the FBI and the National Security Agency collaborated on a highly classified, standalone database. They called this shadow ledger Main Core. It was the ultimate domestic target list built for 0 hour. Declassified records from the National Security Archive reveal a terrifying scope. Main Core reportedly contained the names of over 8 million Americans. These were everyday citizens, activists, and organizers officially flagged by intelligence agencies as potential threats to national security. The government had quietly pre-selected its own population for processing. 8 million targeted individuals means a massive demographic sweep, cross-referencing political dissidents, marginalized communities, and financial outliers. These names were aggressively flagged for immediate, warrantless surveillance or 0 hour detention the second a national emergency was declared. The state mapped out its enemies long before any crisis actually hit. But the main core database of the 20th century was built on clunky mainframe computers, intercepted telegrams, and physical carbon copies. We are operating in the year 2026. Those old analog lists are archaic fossils compared to the terrifying velocity of the machines running inside these server racks today. The front line has violently evolved. Today, modern open-source intelligence and real-time metadata analysis make the surveillance capabilities of 1984 look utterly primitive. The algorithms hunting through these servers do not need a subpoena. They do not sleep. They continuously scrape the global data stream to map your entire digital footprint with devastating, automated precision. The code actively cross-references your political affiliations, your financial transactions, and your exact physical location in real time. It maps your network. It knows who you text, what you buy, and where you sleep. This is not passive observation. It is a highly aggressive, predictive threat model, constantly updating your personal risk score in the absolute dark. The archivist watches the encrypted data packets collide behind the glass panels. Every blinking blue light represents a human life reduced to a mathematical liability. The system is entirely automated, cold, and relentless. There is no human oversight here, no judge to appeal to, just an algorithm deciding if you are a loyalist or an enemy of the state. This server farm is the active front line of the new emergency state. There are no physical trenches here, just endless miles of fiber optic cables silently categorizing the American public. The threat is growing exponentially every single time you swipe a screen or trigger a cell tower. The net tightens with every single byte of data you voluntarily generate. In the year 2026, the government absolutely does not need to deploy undercover informants to infiltrate your community. They do not need to physically tap your phone line in the middle of the night. You are already carrying the ultimate, hyper-accurate surveillance device right in your pocket. You pay the monthly telecommunications bill to track yourself. Your smartphone has already built the comprehensive, undeniable dossier required to place you on a modern continuity of government watch list. You provide the geographic coordinates, the social network maps, and the ideological proof. The machine simply ingests your daily habits and outputs a detention priority ranking. The trap is entirely digital, and you armed it. The physical cages sitting empty at deactivated military bases and the digital cages being built in this humming server room are perfectly synchronized. The brutal logistics of mass detention rely entirely on this unbroken chain of data. You cannot fill a massive prison camp without the automated intelligence dictating exactly who belongs behind the razor wire. The target list is fully compiled and continuously updating. The biometric profiles are securely locked in the federal vault. The infrastructure knows exactly who you are and where to find you. The only thing missing from this catastrophic equation is the physical, brute force required to execute the warrants. The boots on the ground are getting ready to march. The boots on the ground are already marching, but not on foreign soil. A digital watch list is completely useless without the kinetic, physical force required to kick down your door and drag you out into the street. The transition from a glowing server room to a shattered suburban window happens in milliseconds. We are leaving the silent algorithms behind. Right now, we are stepping into the raw, deafening chaos of the physical extraction. The digital trap has finally snapped shut. Through the optics of the logistics contractor, this fake city looks like an active war zone. Flashbangs detonate in rapid succession, shattering the eardrums of paid actors screaming at heavily armored military police. This is not a theoretical white paper buried in a Pentagon basement. This is a live-action urban readiness exercise. The military does not just draft dystopian detention protocols. They aggressively rehearse hunting their own citizens under extreme psychological stress. I am watching an extraction squad stack up against a reinforced door. The adrenaline here is contagious and entirely real. The contractor notes the precise mechanical efficiency of the breach. There is zero hesitation. When the order comes down, the soldiers do not see American civilians. They see hostile insurgents occupying Sector 4. The state is conditioning its enforcers to bypass the innate psychological barrier against turning automatic weapons on their own neighbors. The physical execution of this nightmare does not require inventing new tactics. It relies heavily on deeply entrenched historical frameworks like Operation Garden Plot. Drafted during the civil unrest of the 1960s, it remains the United States military's master blueprint for sweeping civil disturbance control. It is the tactical choreography for deploying federal troops onto American pavement to suppress riots, secure vital supply lines, and neutralize domestic uprisings. These exercises are brutal, grinding stress tests of the continuity of government machinery. The logistics contractor tracks the simulated deployment as troops lock down critical infrastructure, power grids, water filtration plants, and telecommunication hubs. The objective is absolute environmental control. Once the perimeter is sealed, the protocol shifts immediately from suppression to processing. The streets are transformed into an automated funnel for mass civilian extraction. They are practicing how to move thousands of panicked, non-compliant human beings through establishing hardened checkpoints. The extraction teams do not use paper manifests. They are deploying rapid biometric scanning technology right on the asphalt. Retinal scans and facial recognition cross-reference the digital dossiers we uncovered earlier in real time. If your biometrics match a red-flagged profile in the main core database, you are immediately ripped from the processing line. The separation between a foreign battlefield and your local neighborhood is collapsing. You might think this military occupation requires a massive deployment of the National Guard, but the reality is much more insidious. The federal government has spent decades ensuring that the local police force patrolling your street is already equipped to execute these combat maneuvers. The uniforms might say police, but the tactical capability is entirely indistinguishable from an infantry battalion. The catalyst for this transformation is a bureaucratic pipeline known as the Department of Defense 1033 program. Since the 1990s, this federal initiative has quietly transferred billions of dollars of surplus military gear directly to local and state police departments. We're talking about armored personnel carriers, grenade launchers, and high-caliber sniper rifles distributed to small-town sheriffs. The local precinct has been entirely militarized. The logistics contractor watching this drill understands the terrifying equation. When you arm a beat cop with the surplus hardware of a Middle Eastern occupation, you permanently alter their operational psychology. You are no longer citizens to be protected. You are an occupied population to be managed by force. The 1033 program effectively blurred the legal and tactical line between a civilian police officer and an assault-ready soldier. The infrastructure is identical. We are watching your local tax dollars fund a domestic army preparing for 0 hour. If this massive scale of militarization blows your mind as much as it terrifies the experts, hit the like button right now. Do you think a small-town police force armed with armored personnel carriers will hesitate to execute a federal detention order? Let me know in the comments below. And to ensure you do not miss the solution to this constitutional crisis, subscribe to the channel immediately. The mock riot in the training compound reaches a deafening crescendo. Smoke grenades obscure the retreating actors as the heavily armored phalanx advances in perfect, terrifying unison. The logistics contractor notes the brutal efficiency of the sweep. Every single variable has been mathematically calculated. The deployment of tear gas, the zip-tying of wrists, the loading of bodies into transport vehicles. It is an industrialized assembly line designed for human subjugation. This is the undeniable kinetic reality of Readiness Exercise 1984. The legal shadow frameworks are fully backed by millions of rounds of ammunition and armored vehicles parked just a few miles from your home. The state of emergency is not a switch they need to build. It is a switch they just need to flip. When the executive order drops, the local police will simply put on their surplus Kevlar, form a perimeter, and execute the pre-written operational protocols. The boots on the ground are fully trained, heavily armed, and psychologically prepared for the extraction phase. But capturing hundreds of thousands of targets creates an immediate, catastrophic bottleneck. You cannot simply leave them zip-tied on the asphalt. The local jails will overflow in less than 24 hours. The state now faces a massive industrial problem. They must rapidly transport a captive civilian population across the country without triggering a massive public uprising. The bottleneck is closing fast. Capturing hundreds of thousands of targets on the asphalt is one thing, but you cannot leave them zip-tied in the streets. The local holding cells are already overflowing. You need a massive industrial artery to bleed the cities dry. I am standing in a rail yard at 3 a.m. The rhythmic, deafening crash of steel on steel echoing across the floodlit concrete is the sound of that artery pulsing. Look at these endless lines of heavy boxcars stretching into the dark. This is not a commercial passenger terminal. This is cold, undeniable, heavy industry. You cannot move a captive population of 500,000 people in the back of standard police cruisers. The sheer physics of the operation demands a nationwide supply chain. When the executive order is signed, the civilian transport grid you use every day is immediately weaponized. Mass detention is a problem of brutal mathematics and strategic transport corridors. The planners behind Readiness Exercise 1984 understood this immediately. They drafted direct protocols for the absolute federalization of the United States rail network. In a declared state of emergency, commercial routes are suspended. Freight lines are violently repurposed to move human populations quickly, efficiently, and entirely out of public view. This is a synchronized logistical strike. The trains roll in under the cover of darkness, slipping past sleeping suburbs and silent towns. The goal is to extract the targets from the urban centers before the sun comes up and the panic sets in. The rail network becomes a high-speed conveyor belt feeding directly into the military installations we uncovered earlier. It is an operation of terrifying, mechanical precision designed to circumvent resistance. But the federal government does not have the manpower to run this massive supply chain alone. Managing this scale of human cargo requires an army of specialized contractors. The state must outsource the logistics of martial law to the private sector. The integration of corporate efficiency into state-sponsored detention is the true genius of the shadow bureaucracy. They buy the infrastructure of tyranny off the shelf. The paper trail here is chilling. In the year 2006, the Department of Homeland Security awarded a $385 million contingency contract to Kellogg Brown and Root, or KBR. The mandate was explicitly clear. Build temporary detention and processing facilities on an as-needed basis. This was not a hypothetical drill. This was a massive injection of taxpayer capital into the physical architecture of mass incarceration. $385 million buys a staggering amount of razor wire, concrete barriers, and mobile surveillance towers. Private corporations are effectively building the pop-up cages waiting to be deployed at a moment's notice. The speed at which these contractors can mobilize is alarming. They are paid to guarantee that when the rail cars arrive at the staging grounds, the infrastructure to process the influx is fully operational. Outsourcing this massive undertaking to private military contractors is a calculated strategic evasion. It allows the government to entirely bypass strict federal oversight regulations. When a private corporation handles the logistics of detention, the operation falls into a dark gray zone of accountability. Freedom of Information Act requests hit a concrete wall of corporate secrecy. The machinery of your imprisonment becomes proprietary data. You cannot vote out a private logistics board. You cannot subpoena the internal communications of a corporate transport hub with the same ease as a government agency. This privatization of the state of emergency strips away the final layer of constitutional protection. The contractors operate with near total impunity, driven by profit margins rather than civil rights. Human beings are reduced to logistical units, tracked and managed by private algorithms. Moving human beings at this staggering scale requires a terrifying level of synchronization. It is a seamless supply chain of control, demanding the direct coordination of the Department of Transportation, the executives of private rail companies, and thousands of heavily armed escorts. Every switch on the tracks, every signal light, and every transport manifest is tightly controlled by a unified command structure operating entirely above the law. The armed escorts are the kinetic enforcers of this corporate-state alliance. Private security contractors ride alongside militarized police, securing the perimeter of the rail yards and standing watch over the boxcars. The threat of violence is the glue holding this vast logistical network together. A single break in the chain, a single blocked rail line, and the entire extraction process collapses. The state simply cannot afford a derailment. The sheer volume of coordination required is actively maintained right now. This is not a forgotten relic of the Cold War. The contingency contracts are constantly renewed. The rail corridors are mapped and updated with every new piece of infrastructure. The Department of Transportation actively participates in continuity of government war games. The physical tracks buried beneath your city streets are pre-programmed for the suspension of your liberty. When you look at the historical data of mass detention, the mathematics of targeting are never blind. The database flagging 8 million names and the logistics to move 400,000 people rely on aggressive demographic profiling. Urban centers, heavily populated by minority groups and political dissidents, are the primary extraction zones. The rail lines are strategically mapped to bleed these specific, densely populated districts first. The rail yard around me is quiet right now, save for the metallic groan of the idle freight cars. But this silence is entirely deceptive. It is the tense, coiled energy of a loaded weapon. The corporate contracts are signed, the rail lines are dedicated, and the armed escorts are on standby. The entire nationwide transportation grid is effectively a sleeper agent, waiting for a single catastrophic event to activate its true secondary purpose. You are looking at the industrial backbone of a shadow state. They have successfully commercialized the suspension of the United States Constitution. When the order is given, the machinery will not hesitate. The trains will run on time, and the boxcars will be full. The logistics of the trap are flawless. But to understand how this nightmare became permanent law, we have to look at how the war on terror normalized the unimaginable. To understand how this logistical nightmare became permanent law, we have to look at the exact moment the war on terror normalized the unimaginable. Through the eyes of the investigative archivist, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the National Security Archive, the paper trail shifts. The Cold War exercises and corporate rail contracts you saw earlier did not disappear when the Soviet Union fell. They simply mutated, waiting for a new justification to emerge from the ashes. The archivist sifts through stacks of declassified domestic policy memos, their edges worn, the ink heavy with redacted black lines. A chilling pattern emerges from the dates. The most terrifying part of the readiness exercise is that it never truly ended. It did not go back into the vault. It just slowly, methodically, became our daily life. The extraordinary measures designed for the absolute collapse of civilization were quietly repackaged as standard operating procedure. On the glowing monitor in the reading room, archived news footage from September 11th flickers. But as the archivist fast-forwards, the burning towers seamlessly dissolve into modern riot police cordons. The footage shifts to surveillance drones hovering over American cities in 2026. You are watching a society trapped in a continuous, vibrating tension. The nation never stood down from red alert. The front line was simply relocated to your neighborhood streets. This is a bureaucratic battlefield. The first major legal casualty is documented right here in the immediate aftermath of the attacks. The passage of the USA Patriot Act. This legislation radically expanded the government's ability to conduct warrantless wiretaps and surveil domestic populations. It was sold as a temporary shield against foreign threats. In reality, it was the ultimate domestic weapon, legally validating the deepest, darkest desires of the main core database. The archivist cross-references the surveillance mandates. The algorithmic targeting we uncovered earlier was no longer operating in a legal gray zone. The Patriot Act weaponized the digital dragnet. Your financial records, your phone calls, your physical location, all of it became instantly accessible without judicial oversight. The state no longer needed a warrant to suspect you. It only needed an algorithm to flag you. The digital cages were built long before the physical ones. The true horror of this archive is not what is hidden, but what was passed in broad daylight. You keep flipping the pages forward to 2011. The threat of terrorism had seemingly cooled, but the legal machinery only accelerated. Buried deep within the routine funding of the military, the archivist finds the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011. It contains a single, catastrophic provision that completely detonates the concept of constitutional due process. This provision, heavily contested but ultimately signed into law, effectively allows for the indefinite military detention of American citizens without trial. Read that again. No judge, no jury, no legal representation, just a military cell indefinitely. The Posse Comitatus Act, the law meant to keep the military from policing the streets, was effectively bypassed. The framework of Rex 84 was no longer just the hypothetical drill, it was now encoded into the annual defense budget. The archivist stares at the heavy black text of the congressional record. The fluorescent lights overhead hum a steady, monotonous drone, mirroring the mechanical, unfeeling nature of these laws. You realize that a terrifying principle is at work here. History proves that emergency powers, once granted to the executive branch during a panic, are almost never fully relinquished. The government treats a crisis as an opportunity to expand its reach, and that reach never truly retracts. Think of it as a bureaucratic ratchet. The crisis hits, the gear turns, the state gains power, and the gear locks into place. It never spins backward. The temporary security measures of the early 2000s have calcified into the permanent architecture of a shadow state. The archivist realizes that the emergency declarations are just legal Trojan horses. They smuggle in the infrastructure of martial law under the guise of temporary, necessary public safety. This brings us to the most dangerous reality of 2026. We are currently living in a low-grade state of exception. The legal walls separating normal civilian life from the absolute control of martial law have been worn down to a transparent membrane. The state does not need to declare a sudden, violent coup to suspend your rights. The legal tripwires are already strung across every aspect of your life, waiting for the slightest pressure to activate the system. You can feel the adrenaline spike as the archivist connects the final dots. The militarized police forces, the digitized databases, the corporate rail contracts, the indefinite detention laws. None of these exist in isolation. They are interlocking components of a singular, massive machine. We are walking around inside a loaded gun. The legal framework is so thoroughly eroded that a constitutional republic exists only in name, sustained purely by the illusion of normalcy. Look closely at the modern riot cordons on the archivist's monitor. The heavily armored officers staring down civilians are not an aberration. They are the intended result of 2 decades of continuous, unchecked emergency legislation. The state has successfully engineered a permanent legal loophole. By keeping the population in a perpetual state of low-level fear, the government maintains the absolute legal authority to execute mass detention the second that fear boils over into chaos. The reading room feels suffocatingly small. The weight of these documents is physical. The architecture of tyranny is fully operational, perfectly legal, and hiding in plain sight. You are not waiting for a dictator to take power. You are waiting for a bureaucrat to sign a form. The system is entirely automated, legally bulletproof, and ruthlessly efficient. The only question remaining is what kind of spark will finally ignite the powder keg and slam the doors shut for good. The powder keg has not detonated yet. Walk out onto a quiet, empty suburban street at dawn in 2026. Look at the complete normalcy of the manicured lawns and the silent driveways. But if you listen closely, beneath the visual silence, you can feel the low, thrumming bass tone of a waiting machine. This is what the front line of a shadow war actually looks like. I have reported from conflict zones, and the terror usually comes from the sky. But here, the battlefield is bureaucratic. We survived another night without a declared emergency, but the trap is fully set. The trenches are dug in the legal code, and the landmines are buried in the terms of service on your digital devices. The silence on this street is not peace. It is merely a ceasefire. The infrastructure of tyranny in the modern era does not announce itself. It does not roll down your street in armored tanks or shatter the dawn with artillery fire. It arrives silently, through pre-signed executive orders and algorithmic targeting. It is a localized digital dragnet parsing your smartphone metadata, executed by local police armed with surplus military rifles. When I began this investigation, I thought I was hunting a historical anomaly. I was looking for the ghost of Readiness Exercise 1984, buried in the declassified Cold War archives. But as we tracked the paper trail, the past bled directly into the present. What started as a paranoid drill by the Reagan administration has metastasized into the architecture of our daily lives. We stood outside deactivated military bases, looking at perimeter fences specifically engineered to lean inward. We saw how the primitive ledgers of Main Corps evolved into the relentless, automated open-source intelligence dragnets of 2026. We realized that the state does not need informants anymore because your own phone is continuously building your detention dossier. We followed the massive federal contracts awarded to private military corporations, building out the logistical capacity to move human beings on an industrial scale. We saw the rail networks primed for federalization. This entire supply chain of absolute control, from the biometric scanners to the heavy boxcars, is sitting in plain sight, fully funded, perfectly legal, and terrifyingly efficient. The original blueprints of FEMA mass detention protocols did not disappear. They simply mutated. They became deeply, permanently embedded in modern continuity of government planning. Shielded by the perpetual state of emergency normalized after September 11th, this shadow bureaucracy operates entirely outside the boundaries of public oversight, waiting just beneath the surface of the law. This is the chilling reality of our current theater of operations. The perimeter fences are already built. The indefinite detention laws are already written and legally vetted. The holding cages are empty, but the massive steel doors are unlocked and heavily oiled. The state has constructed a flawless mechanism to extinguish your civil liberties. All they need now is a justifiable reason. This shadow bureaucracy is patiently waiting for a sufficient, undeniable crisis. It could be a catastrophic nationwide power grid failure. It could be a synchronized cyber attack on the global financial sector, or the rapid spread of a severe, unprecedented pandemic. It only takes one moment of absolute, paralyzing national panic for the executive branch to flip the final switch. And when 0 hour arrives, the government will not have to violently seize your rights. The terrified public will willingly hand them over. In the chaotic aftermath of a total systemic collapse, people will beg for order at any cost. The state will gladly provide that order, sending the militarized police into these quiet suburban streets to execute the protocols of martial law. You must understand that you are the target of this dormant infrastructure. If you believe you are safe because you are a law-abiding citizen, you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of a state of exception. When the Constitution is suspended, innocence is no longer a legal defense. It is merely an administrative oversight. You are just a data point on a continuity of government watch list. We have successfully mapped the perimeter of this shadow state, but uncovering the truth is an ongoing battle. If this intelligence briefing gave you a vital new perspective on the fragile reality of your freedom, hit the like button and subscribe to the network. Join us in this continuous research, because exposing the blueprints of the machine is the only way we can begin to dismantle it. The ultimate defense against this logistical leviathan is not retreating into paranoia or building a concrete bunker in the wilderness. You cannot physically outgun a fully mobilized federal apparatus. The only weapon that actively neutralizes a bureaucratic trap is relentless, uncompromising public awareness. We must drag these classified frameworks out of the shadows and into the harsh light. The absolute refusal to trade your constitutional rights for the fleeting illusion of temporary safety is the only true barricade we have left. The silent war for your freedom is happening right now, in the quiet dawn of your own neighborhood, before the sirens ever start to wail. Keep your eyes open, recognize the invisible cages, and never let them normalize the sound of the locks turning. Signing off.